Thank you for the opportunity to address you today as we move to ratify the Nagoya Protocol, a landmark agreement in international governance on biodiversity that was adopted at the 10th meeting of the Conference of the Parties on the 29th of October 2010 in Japan. But it has taken longer than we might have liked. I am proud that Ireland is now in a position to bring this important framework forward. The Nagoya Protocol aims to ensure that equitable sharing of benefits arising from the utilisation of genetic resources. In plain English, this means that it seeks to ensure that everyone benefits from and has access to the bounty of nature's diversity. Biodiversity, or the variety of life on Earth, is a technical term that encompasses biological diversity at the level of the ecosystem, the species and the gene. It's the latter, the genetic resources, that the Nagoya Protocol focuses on. Genetic resources comprise of all genetic material of actual or potential value. Essentially, they encompass all living organisms, plants, animals and microbes that carry genetic material that is potentially useful to humans. Genetic resources can be taken from the wild, domesticated or cultivated. They are sourced from natural environments or human-made collections such as botanical gardens, gene banks, seed banks and microbial culture collections. And they have many commercial and non-commercial applications across a range of sectors, including pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, technology, academia, food, agriculture and other industries. The Nagoya Protocol emerged from a global treaty, the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, known as the CBD, to which Ireland is a party along with 195 others, including the European Union. The CBD has three main aims: to secure conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of all its components, and the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising out of the utilisation of genetic resources. It's the latter aim that is the subject of the Nagoya Protocol. In the context of current global efforts to tackle biodiversity crisis, fairness in the distribution of benefits and the concept of a just transition are crucial. I recently attended the CBD's Biodiversity COP15 in Montreal, Canada, where access and benefit sharing was a major focus of the negotiations on the new global framework for nature. The protocol underpins this by providing a strong basis for greater legal certainty and transparency for provider countries of genetic resources utilised in research and development in third countries. This relationship usually involves a less developed country provider and a more developed country user. Ratification will enhance Ireland's reputation as a positive actor for biodiversity. It will also bring us in line with 20 other EU member states who have ratified the protocol. For industry and academia, particularly in research and development, ratification will demonstrate Ireland's commitment to having an appropriate legislative and regulatory framework in place when it comes to the important issue of access and benefit sharing. There was a delay in Ireland moving to ratify the protocol due to a number of factors, including the need to introduce legislation in Ireland to implement the EU ABS regulation 511/2014, S11/2014, which provides a framework for the protocol in the EU, as well as pressure from other priorities in the biodiversity area in recent years. The National Parks and Wildlife Service of the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage is the lead authority with respect to the implementation of the EU ABS regulation and the Nagoya Protocol in Ireland. Cabinet approval, a memo for Government on ratification of the protocol in June 2022. It is now necessary and indeed welcome for us to move the process forward and ratify this vital framework. I look forward to members' questions, and our officials will do our best to answer the questions from members.
Thank you very much, Minister Noonan. I'll go now to the members. Are there any questions on this? And I will go first to Deputy Higgins, please. You're first on the
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here with us today and taking us through this, and also thank you for representing Ireland in Montreal at COP15. I think it was really important that we were there. I know you were only there briefly as it happened with domestic matters, but I think it was a really important sign and signal for Ireland's support for everything, I suppose, that's happening on a biodiversity level. Just in relation to the actual protocol itself, just Article 5.2 and Article 5.5. They speak about legislative, administrative and policy measures that we must undertake to achieve, I suppose, the overall objectives of the protocol. And I was just wondering at this stage, do we have any indication as to what are the next steps for us? Do we need further legislation? Do we need administrative policy changes? Is it more in that sphere? How do we take this to the next level here in Ireland?
Thanks, Deputy, for your questions, and I'll ask my officials to come in just with more specifics, but yes, legislation is required, and in tandem with that, it is the intention of MPWS to establish an ad hoc group to bring together a stakeholder forum to look at the elements of the ratification and the implementation of the protocol. All of this, in terms of a timeline, we're probably looking at between the next 12 to 18 months to move through that process. So all of this is in train within our department, as I said in my opening statement. There have been a lot of priorities, as you're aware, around biodiversity, and thank you for your comments in relation to COP15. It was very important that Ireland was represented, and we had a fantastic delegation out there, and certainly a very good outcome generally from the COP. We are moving in line, and I think it is our intention over the next 12 to 18 months in terms of the legislative development of it, the establishment of an ad hoc group, and to bring together stakeholders. There are many stakeholders in this area, from pharma to the National Botanic Gardens, a lot of people with an interest in this that we wish to bring together to move on its implementation. So I might ask Alan Moore to come in further to elaborate on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Minister. I think the Minister has covered it quite well. We have legislation in place already that implements the European Union ABS regulation, which was introduced in 2014 to give effect to the protocol in the Union. So a requirement of us is we introduce an SI, statutory instrument in Ireland, to give effect to matters for national concern within that regulation. So our legislation is in place already since 2019. Once we ratify the protocol, we're free to go ahead and formally implement the protocol in Ireland. I suppose at a level, we'll be considered a party. We can take part in the meeting of the parties at UN level. We can involve ourselves in discussions around how the protocol moves forward, how it deals with issues that maybe are tangential to the protocol. So yeah, it's basically, as the Minister said, over the next 12 to 18 months, we'll be putting in process the implementation, working groups, discussions with stakeholders, and so forth.
Thank you. That's really good to, I suppose, hear what those next stages are and how that implementation programme looks like. I know we have, Chair, quite a heavy agenda, but I do think this is a really important issue. And I wonder maybe we could ask the Minister and his officials back in a twice yearly capacity to give us an update on that implementation programme, how things are going in terms of establishing the forum and the various working groups, that stakeholder interaction, and any of the changes that need to come, whether there's further legislation, as the Minister has indicated, how that's being progressed, because I think it would be good for us to be kept abreast of that, if that's possible.
Yep, more than happy to.
Thank you, Deputy Higgins. I think it's a good suggestion. We had done it last year where we were getting those updates from the Minister on Planning and Local Government, and then we were getting the updates from the Minister on Heritage and Electoral Reform, and then also on housing. But we do have a fairly heavy agenda, so I take your suggestion on board, and we'll try and work it into the schedule somehow. Thank you, Deputy Higgins. I'll move now to Deputy O'Brien, please. You're online there.
Chair, unfortunately, I'm not on campus, so I'm not entitled to ask questions.
Thank you, Deputy O'Brien. I'll move now to, it's actually my slot now for the Green Party. So, Minister, firstly, I would just thank you for bringing this to us. I understand it dates back to 2010, and it's probably something that's just hasn't been prioritised or hasn't been high on the agenda, so I think it's incredibly important that you have resurrected this and brought it to us here today, and that we can finally take our place at the table, as Mr. Moore has outlined there. And also, just to reiterate what Deputy Higgins had said, I think the Irish delegation at COP15 in Montreal did an exceptionally good job on behalf of us, on behalf of Ireland. especially around that marine protection issue as well. And often a part of our biodiversity, a part of our environment that's overlooked because it's out of sight and we think everything is fine out there. And obviously we know well that in our marine environment is under severe pressure and damaged in many, many areas. Massive sea area that we have. And you'll be aware that we're shortly to commence pre-legislative scrutiny on the marine protected areas legislation as well. So another really important piece of legislation for Ireland, and I think we'll be carrying that out quite shortly, and we look forward to welcoming you and your officials back in on that. Just in terms of the Nagoya Protocol, and the 20 EU countries have signed up to it. What kind of, if this protocol hadn't have been put in place and had never been signed up, what were the threats and the damages in genetics and the relationship between genetic biodiversity and protection of that? What drove this protocol in the first place, and why was it established?
Again, I might ask Alan to come in specifically, but certainly, and again, thank you for your comments in relation to COP15, and again, just to put on record to thank our officials, our team, who represented Ireland so well as part of the wider EU negotiations team, and certainly there was a very positive outcome from COP15 that I think is going to lead to transformative change, I would hope. And again, I thank this committee. I know this is a very busy committee, and I know a lot of your work is dominated with housing legislation, given the crisis that we're in relation to housing. So we are appreciative of the space being given to the marine protected area legislation to this here today as well. I think it's important for us. These are of significant importance too. Really, the Nagoya Protocol, out of the wider negotiations around Nagoya in Japan in 2010, that was 18 years in negotiation. It was four years in actually drafting the Nagoya Declaration. So there was quite a substantial amount of work built up to that in 2010. And this element of it, around the equitable sharing of genetic resources, was important, particularly for less developed countries, in terms of us as the receiving countries of that genetic information and those genetic resources, and in most cases, less developed countries being the countries that are the repositories of that resource. So it's critically important that we had in place this protocol to ensure that there's a fair and equitable sharing of that, and to ensure that there's a common agreement among signatory nations to use those resources fairly and equitably. And I think we've had reports in Ireland from Trócaire and Oxfam around agroecology and around supporting the wider genetic resources that we have, and how the benefits of sharing these resources can ultimately benefit our wider ambition around conservation and restoration of nature. I might ask Alan to come in and elaborate further on that, but that's as I see it, as in terms of the benefit of this protocol. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair. The third pillar of the Convention on Biological Diversity already deals with access and benefit sharing. It makes it a pillar of the Convention. The purpose of the Nagoya Protocol is to provide clarity and a strong legal framework to ensure that obligations around benefit sharing are met, and to enable parties to put in place at national level legal obligations on users, as the Minister has pointed out. I suppose the motivation behind the protocol is to ensure that these provider countries, which are generally in less developed economies or island states or vulnerable states, that the genetic resources that are used in generally more developed states, particularly in the EU and UK and Asia, that the benefits arising from this utilisation are shared in a way that is agreed upon at the outset. So there's a process of mutually agreed terms that are put into a clearinghouse that is set up under the protocol, and this ensures that parties see through their obligations to the end. So this is the motivation behind it.
Okay, very good. So this would fit very well with our sustainable development goals then as well. Okay, that's cleared up, or given a little bit more information. Thank you very much, Minister and Mr. Moore. I'm going to move now to Deputy O'Callaghan, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Minister, for your work on this and for bringing this to us. And while there's delay, it is welcome to see this happening. I just want to ask in terms of practical terms what this means. So we're talking about users who, for example, in an Irish context, typically are users, and what legal obligations are being put on users in an Irish context. And, you know, in practical terms, what does this mean, or what effects does this have on users in Ireland? And also, you know, we've done the access and benefit sharing regulation, but is there more that needs to be done or that could be done, or is that it, the ABS regulation implementation and signing up to this, is that it, job done, or is there further that we can go, or what's the thinking on that?
Okay. And again, I'll defer to Alan on the specifics, but I mean, the stakeholders, as we see, are research institutions, pharma companies, again, which have a very strong presence in Ireland, research organisations such as Tagish, the Patent Office, National Botanic Gardens. So these would, as we would see it, would be the users of these genetic resources. And you know, the Botanic Gardens in itself is a great repository for genetic resources in terms of its wider work around research as well. So as we see it in terms of implementation under the ABS requirements, we would establish a working group, a stakeholder group to look at the implementation of the protocol and how they're in this country as a user country, how those organisations would meet the requirements of the protocol. Again, I'll ask Alan to perhaps come in on specifics in relation to that.
Thanks, and maybe just before you come in, just to, so for example, you know, pharma companies, it's one thing, you know, these obligations in terms of public bodies that are acting in the public interest, but private bodies who have their own interests, how far do these obligations go, or does that all have to be worked out, or if you can give us some insight into that?
Okay, thank you. This, I suppose, goes back to the initial purpose of the protocol. You've raised a good point about how do providers ensure that users, you know, act on their obligations. So if the legal framework is in place where the protocol is ratified, there's awareness of the protocol. Users in Ireland will be from the sectors that the Minister has pointed to: pharma, cosmetics, research, any, I suppose, institute that is dealing with organic genetic material. The provider countries are where it starts. So if the genetic material is, say, in Peru, and it's a plant-based material that is used in a cosmetic or has a medical use, the providers of that resource will ensure, they'll agree terms with the user. So that's where it starts, and that goes into the ABS clearinghouse, which is an online clearinghouse of documentation online that we all sign up to once the protocol is ratified. And this is where the process of the obligations are monitored through due diligence declarations made by the user that match with the provider country's documents that they've lodged. And this is where the clearinghouse that's brought into force by the protocol ensures that the obligations are met. So the legislation we have in place is to ensure we meet our obligations under the protocol and the EU ABS reg, so there's no need for further legislation at this time.
Okay, so legislation we have in place ensures that if there's a pharma company or a cosmetic company operating in Ireland and it's using genetic resources in a country like Peru, that it legally then is obliged to go through this process in terms of getting that genetic information or resources from Peru, that it's sharing that information with the country that it's taking it from, or sharing it generally universally, is it?
It starts with the provider country. So
but it is shared then from that university.
Yes.
Yeah. But some of the intent being the provider country having the most rights to that access. So that's what we're doing here in practical terms with the protocol and the legislation that's in place. Yeah.
Yes, in practical terms, we're dealing with benefit sharing.
Yeah.
So on the provider country, they're dealing with access. We're dealing with the benefit sharing side of it to ensure that the benefits arising from utilisation of this resource in, say, Ireland or Germany or wherever it is, are shared on agreed terms in a fair and equitable manner with the provider country.
Yeah, so it simply isn't legal then anymore for a company to operate here, get those genetic resources, and not to be sharing them in a fair and equitable manner. Is that
This is the aim of the protocol.
This is the
yes.
aim, yeah. And sorry, just in terms of reaching that aim, then what needs to be done? So setting up the ad hoc group, getting all the stakeholders in, it's working out the operation of that, is it?
Yeah, this is, that's at the, I suppose, the detailed implementation level. I should say that providers and users will have discussions outside of scope of public bodies initially. So it'll be a private company, and it could be a private body, a landowner or a tribe, or a local government in the provider country, and they come up with their mutually agreed terms, and they lodge their initial agreements with the ABS clearinghouse, and we'll get notification of that, and then it's to ensure that that's matched by a due diligence application from the user in Ireland.
Okay, so when that goes to the clearinghouse, we get notification, and there's a monitoring role here then to ensure that no one's pulling a fast one or using their kind of economic influence or whatever to put undue pressure so that it was a poor agreement or anything like that. So there is an ongoing monitoring role then here for us to be satisfied that those standards are being met.
Yeah.
That's the important piece of ongoing work here then, is it?
Yeah, the monitoring role falls to the competent authority or the focal point in Ireland, so the department or the minister, or in this case the MPWS, and that's I suppose the main monitoring before enforcement. But that's the main role, is monitoring these due diligence applications that come in.
And the National Parks and Wildlife Service will be doing that here. Yeah. Okay. That's everything I want to know. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Deputy O'Callaghan. I'll go now to Deputy Gould, please.
Thank you, Minister, and your team. Just a couple of questions I have. I suppose you talk about the importance of biodiversity and the importance of this for everyone. I suppose I represent a constituency with a below average tree density, which is poor public open spaces, and has very few retained biodiversity habitats. And I was just wondering, will this mean anything for my constituency, or is this something completely different than to that? I suppose the biodiversity habitats is so important at the moment, and for the people I represent, this is something that some people are very interested in.
Yeah, again, certainly this protocol wouldn't be directly related to it. Certainly in your own constituency, a lot of the pharma companies that we're talking about in relation that would be affected by the protocol are situated around the West Cork area. But within, if you don't mind, Chair, just to respond to the Deputy's question, certainly there is very good movement in Cork City and County around biodiversity. I think the local authority has appointed its own biodiversity officer, as well as our department supporting the rollout of further biodiversity officers across the country. So I think there's going to be plenty of support there for communities and I think it's really important in terms of urban biodiversity as well, because you deal a lot with housing issues, and it's really important we're not just building housing units, but we're having communities that are biodiversity-rich communities in urban areas, and that can be achieved. So there's no doubt that the appointment of biodiversity officers in Cork, both in city and county, is going to be a huge benefit to those communities, and having biodiversity action plans at a local level, I think there's a great opportunity. So I think you will see significant, and there's already been significant work in Cork City and County in relation to urban biodiversity. I hope that answers your question, but I think specifically in relation to this protocol, obviously it will impact on a lot of the pharma companies that are based in Cork, in the greater Cork area in West Cork. So I think, but a positive benefit for all.
And do you think those pharma companies will engage with this process in a positive manner?
Yeah, there's quite an amount of work to be done around capacity building and support implementation at a national level that our department will lead on, as well as the legislative element of it and research. So there's actually quite an amount of significant opportunity arising out of this protocol in an Irish context. And our general sense of direction with all of this work is to collaborate and to work in a collaborative way with all of the stakeholders to ensure its implementation. And we're confident that all of the stakeholders that we've read out earlier will play a positive, active role in that implementation.
Because research from the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations have found that the protocol creates a transactional framework for sharing pathogens and undermines global health security. Will the research here need a permit to access? Will researchers here need a permit to access our own state's biodiversity for research and development of this protocol? And what protections are we taking to avoid the consequences warned by the IFPM?
I might defer to Alan on those specific questions, but as I said, I think there's positive benefits in terms of the research element of it, and we still have a significant amount of work in relation to capacity building among all of our stakeholders, but I might ask Alan to come in specifically on those questions.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Morning, Deputy. The first question about pathogens, there are discussions at EU level, at the EU expert group for ABS, that pathogens should be outside the scope of the protocol. So that we don't see that as an issue at the moment. If I understand the question, the second part, in terms of accessing our own resources, no, the state, all sovereign states have access to their own sovereign resources. That doesn't change with the protocol. Access to Irish genetic resources is not affected.
Okay, thank you for that. And one last question there in relation to, I suppose the Minister mentioned about sharing, the importance of sharing information. I suppose I recently become interested in the concept of citizen science and the impact it can have on the environment. I've met with the owner of Open Litter Map, a map that could potentially support improving our biodiversity, but I know that there are other initiatives around dereliction, animal species and more. This seems a likely, I suppose, a really exciting area of research, and I wonder if will the protocol, with its focus on sharing, will support or hinder citizen science in the field?
Again, we would see it as unrelated. I've had engagement with Open Litter, the provider of Open Litter Map as well, and what we've done recently is bolster the governance around the National Biodiversity Data Centre, and given it, and in terms of its ability to gather data through citizen science, I think has been greatly enhanced, and we've seen, particularly during COVID, where they've had a real significant spike in terms of people inputting through its portal, biodiversity.ie, in uploading citizen science data in terms of species across the country. And I think that's been really fantastic, and we would encourage people and communities to be involved in data gathering because it is actually hugely beneficial to the state in terms of having data, good data available around species distribution and plotting trends in terms of climate change and biodiversity loss. We're very much in support of a citizen science-led approach, and this will be certainly reflected in the next National Biodiversity Action Plan as well.
Just one last question, Minister. When do you see this legislation come before the committee?
We think within the next 6 months.
The legislation?
Yeah.
The legislation is already done.
Yeah, the legislation is already, so the SI, that element is completed. I think, are you talking about the movement of the ratification? Or
yes.
I think we're moving the next Yeah, the next 12 months, I think.
The next 12 months?
Yeah.
So, thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thanks very much, Deputy Gould. I don't have any other members indicating to come back in. And I do think this is another important step, because while our local biodiversity and our local environment is incredibly important, and it's something that we see right in front of our eyes, deteriorating in front of our eyes, our global ecological web we're all part of that, and there's been tremendous damage done in developing countries, mostly by the developed world, extraction of natural resources, often to the detriment of those local environments and people that live in those countries. So this is another small, or very important small step in protecting that and encouraging that equity across the planet that we need. So I thank you for bringing it to us this morning, Minister.
Thanks, Chair.
And as Deputy Higgins had stated earlier, we would look forward to bringing you in again, because we're aware of the work that's been done. The marine protected areas I mentioned earlier on, which we'll be happy to have you in the next couple of weeks on that. But just the fact that we've increased that marine protected areas significantly from that 2.5% that we had up to, I think we're up around 8% now. So that's a really important step as well towards that target of 30% marine protected areas that we've committed to in the programme for government. The huge investment and restoration of the National Parks and Wildlife Service, would be interested to have you in to consider further how the progress is going on that. The National Biodiversity Action Plan as well, an incredibly important piece of document that will feed into our local biodiversity plans in our local authorities, and our biodiversity officers in our local authorities, another important local step as well. So incredibly important and important work coming out of your department. We appreciate it. Thank your officials for the work that they're doing, and we look forward to welcoming you back to